Friends of Lake County Historical Society, and I'm glad everyone is here. I would like to introduce the Lake County Historical Society officers. I'm President Teresa Conklin, Vice President Ray Sims, Secretary Janine Sims, and Treasurer Claudia Reeder.
I guess it's not exactly a report, but as Memorial Day nears, we need to all remember the veterans that are here with us tonight and those that have gone before us. All of our veterans, past and present, for all of the service that they've given to our country, so that we can be free to enjoy evenings like this evening and have the opportunity to celebrate the history and the culture of Lake County.
Well, my brother over here was making some sarcastic comments a little bit ago, and I was earlier today I was kind of lamenting the fact that I have to do this evening, or that I am doing it this evening. I'm kind of nervous about it. He said, well, it's your own fault. You got yourself into it. And I said, he's right. He's absolutely right. But he's always been kind of a pain in my side. So I'm going to go ahead and just go for it. So tonight I'm going to tell you a love story. First, it's a story of love between a man and a woman, Dalf and Lula Schmink. Now, if we're fortunate enough individuals, we too have found such a romance in our own lives. The bonding of two soulmates who are perfect and a complete match for each other. Their romance began at the turn of the 20th century, and it was the same type as captured by authors such as Louisa May Alcott when she wrote Little Women, Joe's Boys, and Rose and Bloom. Now, on the other hand, it was the story of the Old West, the romance of the Western frontier as captured by and immortalized by such authors as Zane Grey and B.M. Bauer. It was the love of family and family heritage and the love of Lake County heritage that gave motion to Dalf and Lula's desire to preserve and protect that heritage for future generations, especially for the school children. Now, if you attended elementary school in Lakeview or one of the surrounding communities during the 1940s or the 1950s, very likely you went on a field trip to the Schmink Museum. It is probable that in the days following the field trip, your teacher required you to write a thank you note to letter to Mr. and Mrs. Schmink, and if you did so, your letter was gratefully received by the Schminks, and then Dalf archived your letter with all the other letters that they had received or ever would receive during Dalf's lifetime. Dalf was a consummate saver, and he archived every piece of written information that came into his possession. In reading through some of those letters, it is obvious that the boys liked the gun collections of S, and the girls were most fond of the doll collection. Now here's an example. May 20th, 1959. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Schmink, your museum was very interesting. Where did you get the octopus that was in the jar? I have never seen one before. I like the guns, mostly the machine gun. I have a .22 gun. The dishes were lovely. I liked the sword, and I told Larry Smith that there was a sword in the cane, and he never believed me. Your friend, Mickey Dugan. And from that same class, dear Mr. and Mrs. Schmink, you have a nice museum. I enjoyed it very much, and all of the dishes were beautiful. But the ones I liked best of all was the dolls. The old-time desk, the canes, and the record player, and many other things. Your friend, Patricia Ann Wallace. Some of you might remember her. The Schmink Memorial Museum is located in a pristine white craftsman-style house on Southeast Street. The house is filled with the cherished and well-preserved treasures of Lake County's past that Dalf and Lula collected over 61 years of marriage. Just past the front door, gently and gradually, the loving presence of Dalf and Lula infuses itself into each room as the journey begins. It's a journey backwards in time to a frontier life that was often harsh and demanding, and yet at the same time it was surprisingly genteel and very simple. It was the life of those first early settlers who made their homes here in this remote area, this vast land, this far northwestern edge of the Great Basin, Our corner of the world was described by Les Shaw, editor of the Lake County Examiner, as being behind the sagebrush curtain. Dalf and Lula were genuine products of this high desert country. Both of them were born into families typical of the early settlers in and surrounding Lake County. At the same time, their backgrounds were very different from each other. The high desert was not considered a destination point for the westward bound pioneers as they traveled west beyond the Missouri country by wagon train and horseback. Some of them traveled by boat south, rode across Panama, and by boat again up to various destinations up and down the Pacific coast. As the stories of our pioneering ancestors unfold, it is often found that they arrived in Lake County from the milder, kinder climates of the Willamette and Rogue River valleys of western Oregon, or that they migrated north from the Sacramento Valley of California. Differing circumstances caused them to uproot and push into this unsettled and untamed high desert. Lake County today, even though we are advancing into the 21st century, is still located far beyond the major travel routes of the western United States. But here in Lake County, those pioneers found the real edge of the frontier they were often seeking, a strange and a high elevation desert that sang to their souls. This was a land still to be tamed, and where they could rest at home from some of the wildest and most unyielding that Mother Nature has ever offered up. Many of us, who are fortunate enough to be descendants of those pioneering folks, feel those deep roots set down by our own ancestors. We feel their love and passion for this, our homeland, for generation after generation. Even now, compared to most of the world, it is still a pristine little corner of the frontier where we make our livings and we raise our families beyond the sagebrush curtain. Dalfius Carl Schmink was born on July 3rd, 1876 in Ayden, Modoc County, California. His parents were Hugo and Phoebe Schmink, Boxall Schmink. Dalf, as he was called, was the only child of Hugo and Phoebe. Dalf's father, Hugo, immigrated to the United States from Germany in 1868. On the 1870 federal census, Hugo was found living in the Northern California community of Susanville. There he worked as farm labor for a young couple who had also immigrated from Germany. It is possible that they were acquainted before they left Germany. Perhaps all of them, Hugo and the young couple for whom he worked, left Germany to escape the dark political oppression that shaped Germany's culture for many years. There is no doubt that they sought the promise of hope to be found in the United States, a country where freedom reigned and where all mankind, with hard work and perseverance, could prosper and flourish. Phoebe Boxall, Dalf's mother, was born in Northern California. Her parents were James and Mary Boxall, and they had immigrated to the United States from England. Sometime between the years of 1870 and 1874, James Boxall moved his family farther north in California to the community of Big Valley. The reason for their move is undocumented, but whatever the reason, call it fate if you will, the move placed Hugo Schmink and Phoebe Boxall to be in close geographical proximity for them to meet and spend the rest of their lives together. How they met is also unknown. Did they meet at some social occasion, such as a dance? Perhaps they met as they shopped at the local general store. Only Hugo and Phoebe know. Whatever the circumstance, it was surely the same natural and age-old progression that has taken control of young couples for all of time, and Hugo and Phoebe were married on September 12, 1874, in Stone Cold Valley, Modoc County, California. Researching public records, I found that early in their marriage, Hugo and Phoebe settled in the small Northern California community of Ayden, and not quite 2 years after their marriage, Dalfius Carl Schmink was born. The Hugo Schmink family continued living in Ayden until their son Dalf was 11 years of age. On the 1880 federal census, Hugo's occupation is documented as tinsmith. It is probable that Hugo learned the art and trade of tinsmith while he was a young man in Germany. Why Hugo and Phoebe decided to leave Ayden and move to California is not documented either, as far as I can find. Since the time when I originally researched the Schmick story, I have researched other historical projects, and I've made some discoveries that may or that may not have influenced their decision to move here. In the late 1800s, a general atmosphere of great optimism for the economic future of Lake County and Lakeview was the norm. The primary reason for this economic optimism was predicated upon the pending arrival of the railroad, and even upon the railroad continuing northward to intersect with an east-west-bound railroad in the northern part of the county. A rail line was actually surveyed from Vail to Eugene. Hugo opened his Lakeview hardware store under the name of H. Schmink & Son. During those years, at the age of 11, was not considered too early for a young man to begin his business career. It was there, working at his father's side, that Doubt learned the retail business. H. Schmink & Son Hardware was located on Water Street. Today, Water Street is called East Street. As near as I've been able to pinpoint the location, it was about where the south half of the Thornton building is today. On the evening of May 22nd, 1900, a catastrophic fire broke out in the upper story of the Lakeview House. The Lakeview House was a two-story hotel located less than 1 block north of H. Schmink & Son Hardware. During the course of that terrible night, the fire spread rapidly from one building to the next, and when dawn broke the next morning, downtown Lakeview was almost in complete ruination, with over 60 buildings completely destroyed. It is a credit to those simple times and to the sheer determination of the business owners and residents of Lakeview that by October of that same year, most of the buildings had been rebuilt and once again were open for business. In 1903, Phoebe Schmink's health began to fail. Hugo decided to sell the hardware store and move his wife to a milder climate and to where she was closer to relatives. And so Hugo and Phoebe moved to Lodi, California. But by the time his father sold their hardware business in 1903, Dal's life had become firmly and forever entrenched into Lakeview and Lake County. By that time, he had married his sweetheart, Lula Foster, and they had established their own household and place in Lakeview's early 20th century society. When H. Schmink & Son Hardware was sold, Doubt went to work for the Monogram Store. The Monogram Store was owned and run by two of Lakeview's leading young entrepreneurs, who were the brothers Elmer and Fred Ahlstrom. The Monogram Store advertised itself as the store that carried all things needed and desired by Lakeview's gents. They sold boots, shirts, watches, men's jewelry, as well as good cigars and other various and sundry items. Doubt was broadening his knowledge of retail business as he worked for the Ahlstrom brothers at the Monogram Store. Doubt only worked there at the Monogram Store for 2 years, and in 1905, he bought a working interest in Bailey and Messingall's store. Bailey and Messingall was a general merchandise store, typical of those found in 20th century rural America, early 20th century rural America. Dell spent the rest of his working career at Bailey and Messingall's until he retired 35 years later in 1940. Dell managed the dry goods department, and people, especially the women of the community, depended upon Dell's good judgment to have a complete stock of dry goods available. There are not many people left among us who are old enough to remember Doubt at Bailey and Messingall's, but there are still a few, and my father is one of them. He clearly remembers Doubt Schmink behind the counter at Bailey and Messingall's. Doubt always had a cigar in his mouth. Dad remembers that he never actually smoked a cigar, he just chewed on it. While Doubt was an only child, Lula, on the other hand, was the youngest of 15 siblings. Her parents were James and Elizabeth Currier Foster. Lula was born at the ranch home of her parents in the northern Lake County community of Summer Lake on February 22nd, 1878. She was named Artist Lula Foster, and when she came into more of an awareness of herself as a child, she did not care for the name of Artist, so she made it known that she preferred to be called Lula. Both the Foster family and the Currier family were among the earliest settlers in Summer Lake. They were among those stout-hearted pioneers who pushed over the Cascade Range from the Willamette Valley into the high desert. In 1845, Lula's father, James Foster, was a young lad of 12 when his father sold their family farm near Independence, Missouri. The Fosters used oxen to pull their covered wagons, and they drove a small herd of cattle as they began their journey over the Oregon Trail. They traveled with the Savannah, Oregon Immigrating Society, a wagon train originally made up of 66 wagons. On the banks of the Snake River near the present-day town of Vail, Oregon, the wagon train divided, and the Foster family was among those who decided to travel on to the Willamette Valley via Meek's Cutoff. Meek had convinced that part of the company that the cutoff would be a less rugged route because they would not travel over the Blue Mountains. He told them that it would also be a safer route because they would avoid Indian country, rumored to be hostile to the settlers. So it was that young James Foster traveled on one of the most famous and ill-fated wagon train journeys ever recorded. They traveled over the most barren, arid, and rugged desert country to be found in eastern Oregon. Yet, in spite of the hardships and the illness that plagued and beset that company, the Foster family was able to make it through to the Columbia River without the loss of even one member of their family. However, as they struggled into the Dallas Mission on the Columbia River, the hardships were not over. Although he was only 12, James Foster was among the group of young single men who were selected to drive the loose cattle over the Cascade Route mountain range via an extremely treacherous and narrow trail. Very soon after leaving the Dalles, they lost all of their horses, saddles, bridles, and provisions to a group of thieving Indians. But they had no other choice, and so the young men persevered and continued to drive the cattle on foot. They milked the cows and lived on the milk as they drove them on across the mountains. They were reunited with the rest of their party on the western side of the Cascades at a site near what is now Portland. The Foster family settled about 8 miles southwest of Corvallis. Their father, as well as each of the sons, took up individual donation land claims. Lula's father, James, took his land claim right next to his father's claim, and it was a natural progression of life that James Foster developed a certain amount of responsibility for his parents, and thus he remained beside them for the rest of his father's and his mother's lives. On November 30th, 1848, James Foster married Elizabeth Currier. Similar to her husband, Elizabeth, as a young child, had traveled west on a wagon train. Elizabeth and an older brother were orphaned at a very young age, and they were raised by older sisters. When she was 14, Elizabeth accompanied an older married sister and her husband as they headed west over the Oregon Trail in the first wagon train that took the Applegate Cutoff Trail, traveling by way of Nevada and southern Oregon to reach the Willamette Valley. It was an arduous trip, as they fought their way through merciless and unforgiving desert country. Their journey was often punctuated with grief. One evening, a little girl died from an accidental overdose of the drug laudanum. They buried her beside the trail. They were in the most barren desert land of Nevada, and there were no wildflowers nor anything, for that matter, to place on the little girl's grave. Elizabeth Currier, so young herself, had a tender heart that could hardly bear the thought of nothing to put on that grave. She had in her possession a beautiful purse that was embroidered in a pattern of red roses on black material. Elizabeth took out her sewing scissors and cut one rose from the purse and placed the rose upon the little girl's desolate grave that before then had only been covered with rocks and sandy desert earth. Many, many years later, the purse with its missing rose found its way into the hands of Elizabeth's youngest daughter, Lula Foster Schmink. Lula carefully preserved the purse in a frame and hung it on her wall. Although the site of the grave is very likely unknown, the unfortunate little girl is still memorialized by the missing rose on the black purse that today still hangs on the wall of the Schmidt Memorial Museum. James and Elizabeth Currier Foster spent the first 25 years of their marriage living on their donation land claim in the rich and mild climate of Oregon's Willamette Valley. They raised cattle and horses. Their farm was a success, and they lived a good life full of abundance. However, deep within James Foster beat the heart of an adventure seeker that was never completely quelled by his boyhood trek west over the Oregon Trail. After the death of both his father and his mother, his thoughts began to turn ever more to a country that he'd only heard about, east of the Cascade Mountain Range in the high desert country of Summer Lake. James Foster had heard the stories of John C. Fremont's expedition of 1843. The stories were told by a man who had traveled with Fremont. He told how the Fremont party struggled through deep snow and the frigid conditions of December as they attempted to reach the desert country east of the Cascade Mountain Range. With the very worst of winter conditions upon them, they suddenly came to the edge of a great precipice, where they gazed more than 1,000 feet below to a beautiful and fresh green prairie surrounding the western edge of a long, glistening lake. There was absolutely no sign of ice or snow around the lake's shore. In fact, it gave the appearance of spring and summer. To the men of the Fremont expedition, it seemed like they had stumbled upon a paradise as they stood shivering in 3 feet of snow on the ledge high above. Upon hearing this account, James Foster's itchy foot and unquenchable pioneer spirit drove him eastward to be among those first settlers who would conquer and tame that land. James was relying entirely upon hearsay as he took a few men and 125 head of cattle and traveled into the Summer Lake country during the spring of 1871. James Foster and his party were not the only ones. Others had heard the same stories, and they were also trekking with their livestock and their families into this rancher's paradise. The Summer Lake country completely met with James Foster's expectations. The western side of the lake was an almost continuous meadow filled with bunch grass, anywhere from 1 to 3 feet high. The steep mountains framing the western side of the lake were abundantly covered with pine timber. Although the lake itself was very shallow and it covered a white alkaline base, it was well fed with fresh water. The amount of fresh water was more than sufficient for humans and livestock to use, as well as for the irrigation of orchards and gardens. Here was the land of a real pioneer spirit. Gazing into the early morning haze to the east, mile after mile stretched endlessly on into a far distant horizon. There on that wild and beautiful landscape, God's hand has stroked unnumbered shades of purple and gray. The softly graced layer upon layer of the high desert mountains, the rim rocks, and the mysterious valleys that were surely hidden somewhere between all of it. This land was wild and untamed, and yet it was possessed of an uncharacteristic and mild climate, and the resources were abundant, sufficient to support a large family, and James and Elizabeth Foster had a very large family. It took 2 more years, well into 1873, before James was able to move his entire family and their possessions into a log cabin home he built upon the western shore of Summer Lake. The last 2 of James and Elizabeth's 15 children were born while they lived in that log cabin house. The youngest was their daughter, Artie Lula. James and Elizabeth worked hard on their Summer Lake ranch. Both of them were gifted with forward-thinking minds, and just as they had in the Willamette Valley, they prospered well in the Summer Lake country. As with other pioneering families living in such a remote land, theirs was a tale of self-sufficiency. James developed 7 acres of orchard where he raised luscious fruits and even nuts, and he raised cattle and hogs and horses. James and some of his sons began to specialize in breeding and raising racehorses. Some of the most successful and notable racehorses on the West Coast were produced up at the Foster Ranch. The most famous of those racehorses was named Oregon Eclipse. By the early 1880s, James and Elizabeth had prospered to the point that they were able to afford a larger and a more affluent house. James bought the lumber to build their new home from a sawmill in Cedarville. In Cedarville, a small town about 50 miles south of the Oregon state line, the lumber was loaded onto wagons and hauled over the Warner Mountain Range to the Goose Lake. There, the lumber was transferred onto barges and barged up Goose Lake for about 30 miles to Lakeview's port at the far northern end. Once again, the lumber was transferred onto horse-drawn wagons for another 60-mile trip to the Foster homestead in Summer Lake. Befitting their large family, the ambitious house was very grand. Part of the second floor was devoted to a 24 by 32-foot ballroom. Elizabeth loved music and dancing and parties. During the years that followed, many neighborhood parties and dances were held at the Foster Ranch. People came from far and wide, sometimes traveling an enormous amount of miles, in buggies and hacks and wagons and whatever kind of conveyance they could have to attend the dances. The parties lasted until dawn the next morning. And the people camped and feasted together and often danced to a second night. As Lula became a young woman, she began to display an unusual talent for sewing and dressmaking. Although sewing was considered a necessary skill in those days, Lula's parents noted that her ability with needle and thread was outstanding. James and Elizabeth wanted to give their children every advantage and opportunity they could, and so Lula was sent to Portland, where she completed a course in professional dressmaking. Before she and Dalf were married, Lula moved down to Lakeview for a short time to live with an older married sister. In Lakeview, Lula pursued a very short career as a professional dressmaker. She placed a classified ad in the local paper, and in the ad she guaranteed, "You will be happy with my work." The story of how Dalf and Lula met is not clear. Those stories are typically handed down from parent to child, and because Lula and Dalf did not have any children, a clear picture is not recorded. The author and storyteller part of me can envision several romantic possibilities. However, the researcher side of me requires as much accuracy as possible when either writing or telling historical data. But I do think the following possible scenarios exist. Perhaps Dalf and Lula met while she worked as a dressmaker in Lakeview. Perhaps one day Lula stopped at H. Minkinson Hardware and Dalf waited on her. Perhaps Lula traveled perhaps Dalf traveled up to Summer Lake to attend one of the famous dances and parties at the Foster Ranch. We just don't know the actual circumstance. According to one story that has been verbally handed down regarding their courtship, Dalf rode his bicycle from Lakeview to Summer Lake to call on Lula. Now, in reality, I would have to question some of that story because the Foster Ranch is some 60 miles north of Lakeview. In 1900, northbound travelers did not travel the same route over the same gentle terrain that we travel today. The road north from Lakeview at that time went out through Cox Creek, over the mountains and down to Paisley, but through Clover Flat into Paisley. Through some very rough and steep country. But let us also remember that in 1900, people were blissfully unaware of their disadvantages as compared to our comfortable heated and air-conditioned cars that we travel in today. And let us also remember that it was just as true in 1900 as it is today. Love will always find a way. There is one story about their courtship that is completely and indisputably true. Dalf discovered Lula's fondness for beautiful glass drinking goblets. So he purchased glass goblets, most likely at the Monogram store, Bailey and Messingall's, and each time he called upon Lula, he presented her with a beautiful goblet. Over the years, Lula carefully preserved those goblets and added others to her collection. Today, displayed in their dining room, are over 150 American glass drinking goblets. Dalf, Carl Schmink, and Artie Lula Foster were married on February 6, 1901. They were married at the Summer Lake Ranch home of Lula's parents, James and Elizabeth Foster. In the photo collection at the Schminks is a Victorian photo of Lula Foster Schmink in her beautiful and stylish 1901 wedding gown. Although another unknown fact, I believe it is highly probable that Lula, herself a professional dressmaker, designed and made her wedding gown. Among their wedding gifts was a stylish bedroom set. The bedroom set was shipped into Lakeview from Sacramento via the John Brenner Company. The John Brenner Company was advertised as the great mail order house, apparently the Amazon.com of 1901. Dalf and Lula treasured their belongings and took meticulous care of everything they owned. As a result, that same bedroom set still holds reign in their master bedroom at the museum today. My research has not uncovered the exact location of Dalf and Lula's home during the early years of their marriage. However, I did find a one-liner in the personal section in the Lake County Examiner stating that they had received an award for having the most beautiful yard in that particular year. Dalf and Lula built that house that is now the Schmink Memorial Museum in 1922. The house, of its own accord, has historical significance because they ordered it from Sears Roebuck and Company, and it is a true and original craftsman home. As with everything they ever owned or ever had in their care, the pristine condition of the house today shows the love and fastidious care that they lavished upon it. As museum visitors have wandered through the house, the gracious and yet hardworking and thrifty small-town lifestyles of the 1920s, the 1930s, and the 1940s are observed and comprehended in every room. The lot is small, and when a modest garage was built, there was not a lot of room for garden space left, but still they cultivated beautiful flowers. Because of the high desert climate we experience here in Lakeview, contrary to the calendars on our kitchen walls, springtime sometimes comes very late. Some years it's so late that it collides with summer by just a few days. We know about that, don't we? It was during this time of year and on into the early summer that Dolph would often wander through his garden, painstakingly searching his pansy bed for one special bloom. When he found the exact right pansy for that particular day, he plucked the delicate little posy, carried it inside, and he presented it to the lovely woman he still considered to be his bride. Lula became inspired to applique a pansy quilt. Each pansy on the quilt is patterned after those blooms presented to her day after day by the man she still considered to be her groom. The pansy quilt still adorns the top of their wedding gift bed. Each and every pansy appliqued on the quilt is unique to itself, just as were the pansies that Dolph picked. No two pansies are the same. Dolph himself began to hook a rug patterned after the pansies on Lula's quilt, and just as the quilt adorns the bed, Dolph's rug resides on the bedroom floor. Although they remain childless as their story unfolds, both from official records and stories written and told by those who knew them best, it is easily determined that they seldom lived without another person in their household. In 1909, Lula's father, James Foster, passed away, and Lula's mother, Elizabeth Foster, came to live with Dolph and Lula. Elizabeth Foster lived with them for 12 years until her passing in 1921. Lula, being one of 15 children, had many nieces and nephews, and so it was that at one time or another, many of them lived with Dolph and Lula. Even though Dolph's parents had left Lakeview partially due to his mother's health, it was his father who passed away first. When Hugo Schmink passed away in 1936, his remains were brought back to Lakeview for burial, and Dolph's mother Phoebe began to make her home with them until her death in April of 1944. Dolph and Lula's generosity was a well-known fact throughout the community, and stories of their service to others were often told. A young girl who was in need of a special dress for a very special occasion. Lula knew the young lady, and she also knew that the girl had little to no chance of obtaining the coveted dress, and so Lula took it upon herself to make the dress. The planned dress was to be an elaborate item covered over with lots and lots of delicate embroidery work. Lula enlisted the help of her friends and neighbors, and whenever they found a bit of spare time on their hands, they hastened over to Lula's house to help embroider on the dress. As I came upon this story, it touched my heart with the serene and beautiful picture of those ladies. In my mind, I saw heads of silver and gold and amber bent together over the fine and tedious work. They chattered and shared little bits of news they had recently heard on the community grapevine as they took their delicate stitches. You see, my great-grandparents lived across the street in one house down from the Schminks. Dolph and Lula Schmink were among their dearest friends and neighbors. Among those silver heads bent together over the dress, chatting while we stitched, in my mind's eye, I see and I hear my grandmother, Hattie Chandler.
Thank you, Ray.
Lula's allegiance to family history dominated her personality, and thus she had a strong desire to preserve the story and the artifacts of her own family's heritage, the Foster and the Currier families of Summer Lake. Dolph recognized the importance of preserving the pieces of antiquity that tell the story of Lakeview's historic business life, the merchants, the retail stores, and the lives of the townspeople themselves. As time passed, Dolph and Lula gradually began to amass a distinctive collection of family and culturally historic items. Knowledge of the Schmink's historic collection became well known in the local community. Nothing gave the Schminks greater pleasure than when they were asked to show their collection. Whenever they were asked to show their collection, there was a bustle of activity, what with the opening of storage trucks and cupboards. It meant carefully taking out each item and arranging them in a manner suitable for display. And then, of course, once the show was over, it all had to be packed up again and stored away. And so in 1936, Dolph and Lula gave up on the unpacking and the repacking and made the decision to put their historical collection on permanent display. Once they made that decision, Delph and Lula spent months while they meticulously cataloged, tagged, and dated each item. They built shelves and racks and turned the basement of their house into a museum. In the winter of 1936-1937, they officially opened the museum to the public. From that time on, there was a continual stream of visitors, classes from the schools, scholars and researchers from universities, organized groups, and even impromptu groups. Each visitor was greeted with patient, loving, cooperative, and helpful attention. Delph and Lula were possessed of a natural love for children, and through the doors of their museum, they became benefactors of all boys and girls within reasonable traveling distance of Lakeview. They were of the opinion that it is an essential part of a child's education to understand the importance of history, and so most often, their early museum tours were to school children. Children were awed by the trip backward through time and left the museum with a better understanding of the lives that their own grandparents and great-grandparents lived. Delph and Lula were gentle and kindly people, and often the children felt as though their very own grandparents had presented the historical lesson on that particular day. In the spring of 1952, Mrs. Hull taught a third grade class at the North School in Lakeview. Mrs. Hull was loved by all her eager little students because she was so young, energetic, resourceful, and creative. One day, Mrs. Hull came upon the idea that her classroom should put on a circus performance to entertain the other students at the school. For days, the students practiced the circus performance until their acts were perfected. There were acrobats and jugglers and clowns and lion tamers. There were monkeys and lions and elephants. There was one shy little country girl who could not stay after school to practice the circus act. So Mrs. Hull selected that student to participate in the occasion by being the official ticket lady. On the day of the show, the ticket lady was dressed up in her most outrageous, elegant, and long dress that her tiny grandmother owned. As with the other performers, Mrs. Hull gave lavish attention to the little girl's allowance of grown-up makeup. The ticket lady wore long white gloves, and she was topped off with her grandmother's most flashy hat. The admission price was one button. As each student, teacher, room mother, and visiting parents passed by the ticket lady, they presented her with the required price of one button. Following the circus, Mrs. Hull strung all of the buttons on a stout cord, and a few days later, she took her students on a much-anticipated field trip to the Schmink Museum. You see, Mrs. Hull had learned about Lula's famous button collection. As Lula greeted the eager students at her front door, Mrs. Hull presented her with a long string of buttons that they had earned by entertaining other students at the North School with their circus performance. How proud they were when Lula handed the button string over to Delph, and he painstakingly considered, and then he hung the string of buttons with all the others displayed in grand loops from the low basement ceiling of the Pioneer Kitchen exhibit. Those buttons and Delph's meticulous archival of thank you letters from the students are a testimony to the love and pleasure Delph and Lula Schmink derived from taking school children on a trip through Lake County's past heritage. In the beginning years, the museum was confined to the basement area of Delph and Lula's home. As years passed by and their collection of historical artifacts grew, the museum began to take over more and more of their life, and bit by bit the display began to infuse itself in their day-to-day living quarters on the main floor of the house. Throughout Delph and Lula's life, they never charged admission to see their museum. It was simply their labor of love to Lake County and those who love history. In January of 1957, the Lake County Chamber of Commerce recognized the Schmink's labor of love by presenting them with a plaque of special recognition for their community service in providing the museum for the local community as well as for others. Twice, in 1957 and again in 1958, the Schminks were nominated by the Lake County Examiner for the Community Service Award given annually by the City Club of Portland. Over the years, Delph and Lula developed a reputation for their careful attention to detail as they worked tirelessly preserving the historical artifacts. Their reputation had fused itself into other pioneering families in the community, and those families began to place some of their treasured pieces of family antiquity in Delph and Lula's care. They felt confident that their own history blended well with the Schmink collection, and that their heirlooms would be forever preserved and on display for those with an interest in Lake County history. By the time of Lula's passing in 1962, there were 6,000 items in the museum's care. Ralph Schmink passed away on May 4th, 1960. Ralph was 82 years of age when he passed from his beloved Lula, and she lived on for almost 2 years. During those 2 years, she continued to welcome visitors to the museum. Lula passed away on March 14, 1962, at the age of 84. In her obituary, printed in the Lake County Examiner, they rightfully noted that with Lula Schmink's passing, a major chapter in Lake County's history had closed. Lula was a stalwart member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. The Lakeview chapter, that's right, it is the Lakeview chapter, 2 words, held their regular meetings in the Schmink home. Shortly after Lula's passing, it became general public knowledge and published in the Lake County Examiner that Ralph and Lula had provided in their wills for the perpetuation of the museum by leaving it to the Lake County chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And in fact, it wasn't until just recently that the Lakeview chapter continued to hold their monthly meetings at the museum. The museum was to be operated as the Schmink Memorial Museum. Since that time, the museum has been operated by or under the direction of local members of the DAR. We, as members of the local community who love the Schmink Memorial Museum, find many of our own roots there. We have it firmly planted in our hearts to see it continue to operate and leave its historical influence, especially on the lives of our school children. For many years after Lula's passing, the museum was operated by Jenny Carroll. She not only operated the museum, but she also cared for Ralph and Lula in their later years. When Jenny Carroll retired from the museum, it was then operated for a number of years by Charlotte Pendleton. After those ladies retired, it was time for another generation to step forward, and so Shireen Glenn became the curator, as she worked in that capacity for many, many years. Upon Shireen's retirement as curator, Monica Lawson was hired as the curator. The state chapter of the DAR then directed a few changes, and Louise Taylor, who was the local regent of the DAR, took care of the museum until just recently. All of those hard-working ladies deserve our admiration and complete vote of appreciation. As visitors walk across the porch and through the front door, they are immediately swept backward to the opening days of the 20th century. The spirit of Lake County's past races to the forefront of feelings as each room at the house gradually unfolds, and a magical feeling of transport back to a curious mixture of time from the late 1800s forward through World War II soon takes over. Ralph and Lula's front room is an eclectic mixture of period furnishings from the turn of the century through the 1930s. Immediately, eyes are drawn through the archway to the adjoining dining room. The rich array of glassware, pottery, and china is a pure delight to those who are in love with antique dishware. When visitors gaze upon the furnishings found in the home, there is a realization that even though Lake County is located on the edge of the final frontier of westward expansion, fragile pieces of beauty and comfort were often found within the homes of those stalwart pioneers. A picture comes to mind. A vivid blue sky, green shade trees line the streets and grace the lawns of homes. Clean whitewashed wooden store buildings and weathered wooden sidewalks, interspersed with among other stores made of red brick. Ladies in long dresses and men with battered and beaten hats, mixed among gentlemen wearing fashionable town hats. In the midst of this scene, there is a carefree young man, meandering in and out of the stores, up and down the streets. He is searching through each of the store's display of goods for the perfect glass goblet to present to his sweetheart, the girl he intends to marry. I ask you to put this picture in your mind, because as you wander through the museum, Ralph and Lula's presence is felt, and it permeates the entire house. Beside the dining room, there's a small library. Shelves are stocked with reading material, and a black and white picture of one of James Foster's great racehorses hangs on the wall. To the delight of many of the visiting school children, a Victrolas appears ready to play. The door is open to Ralph and Lula's bedroom, and her pansy quilt is spread upon top of their bed. Their wedding present bedroom set almost crowds the room. Ralph's pansy rug is thrown on the floor, and on the wall, in a gilded frame, hangs a copy of their marriage certificate. The second bedroom door also stands open, and another of Lula's lovely quilts is spread out on the bed. The room is artfully decorated in tones of pink on the vintage wallpaper, and many quilts are displayed about the room, as well as decades of fashionably styled clothes. Their kitchen is painstakingly small when compared to our standards of today. The kitchen, however, was considered quite adequate when functional in 1922. As the years progressed and modern conveniences became available, Dalfalula upgraded. However, now, because the house is no longer used as a home, the original Chicago cooking range has been returned from the basement to the upstairs kitchen. But the porcelain sink has been in use since 1922. Hung on the cherry red and white wallpaper and scattered about the open cupboard shelves are items typically used in kitchens of yesteryear. In among those items are various pieces of tinware made by Dalf's father, who you may remember was a skilled tinsmith. From the back hallway, a stairway descends into the basement where the original museum was confined. The basement is cozily appointed with various nooks and crannies and many glass enclosed cupboards where pieces of history tell their story. Standing at the foot of the stairway is the captain's desk from the battleship Oregon. A typical tack room is tucked away in the basement. I say typical because, of course, it is much too clean for the ordinary outbuilding of an actual tack room. But nevertheless, it is a good all-around display of items found in the livery of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Among the saddles, bridles, and harness are Alstrom and Gunther saddles. Alstrom and Gunther saddles achieved a certain amount of fame for their extreme high quality, and they were an item highly coveted on the West Coast. Their saddle-making business was founded and lived its entire life here in Lakeview, Oregon. The open area of the basement is covered with a mixture of odds and ends of historical interest, including a cabinet devoted to Dalf's collection of shaving mugs. Dalf was able to acquire the mugs as they went out of style from the local barber shops. For many years, it was a custom for barbers to keep on hand a personal shaving mug for their daily customers. Dalf's own shaving mug is in that whimsical collection. Directly to the left of the descending stairway, a sizable area is dedicated to Native American artifacts. In researching the history of the town of Lakeview itself in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it is found that a significant amount of the population was Native American. Their encampments were primarily located at Bullard and Dead Man Canyon and some and other canyons further south of Lakeview. They played an important and interesting role in the ordinary day-to-day lives of the early settlers and residents of the town, and it is an interesting story all in itself. Among the arrowheads, baskets, beaded gloves, and even a papoose carrier is a beautiful buckskin dress. The dress is elaborately decorated with glass and wooden beads. Beside the dress is a photo of Cora Clinton Novale Lynch, who was a woman of the Modoc tribe, and she is wearing the dress. The photo was dated to sometime during the 1920s. The display taking over the rear section of the basement has often been the highlight of the children who have visited the Schmink over these many years. It is Dalfalula's collection of toys and games, highlighting the collection to the delight of every little girl found in almost all of us women, are beautiful dolls. The dolls are typical of various decades from the beginning of the 1900s through the 1940s. Some of the toys belong to Lula's niece, Allie Klippel. The story of Allie is tragic because she died of typhoid fever when she was only 8 years old. Other parts of the toy collection are items that have, over the years, been left in the Schmink's care by members of local families, some of whom were neighbors to Dalfalula. Our recently refurbished research room is tucked away under the stairway in the basement. As I previously noted, Dalf was an avid collector of printed information, and he carefully archived all of it. To those of us whose hobby or work is researching historical information, or if you happen to be a genealogical nut, such as I tend to be from time to time, the research room at the Schmink is a rare treasure. For myself, I tend to want to dig deep and find the how-come of every story. If the information you are seeking took place in Lake County, or if the person you are seeking ever passed through Lake County, the probability is quite high that in the research room at the Schmink, you will find the rest of the story. The Schmink Museum continues on in the hearts of Lake County residents as a living memorial, not only to Dalfalula, but to all of the stalwart ancestors of Lake County pioneering families. I thank you for your kind attention to my story tonight. I want to give credit for the information I presented to several different places, to the archives of the Lake County Examiner, to Ancestry.com, to the book written by Teresa Foster entitled Settlers in the Summer Lake Valley, and to Teresa herself. To the ladies of the Lakeview chapter of the DAR, many of them are my friends and even former schoolmates, and they have often shared their love of the Schmink with me. And last, to my own special memories of the Schmink Memorial Museum, I thank you.
Thank you for the dedication and hard work for management of the historical village, Ed and Arlene Henry. And you'll get a real plaque. Thank you. And the ones that are not here, the Lake County Historical Society in recognition of the continued dedication and recording of the history of Lake County. Thank you, Mr. James Ogle. And lastly, the Lake County Historical Society thanks you for continued dedication and enhancing the downtown area, Mike and Terry Beeson.